I leaned back in my deck chair, trying to savor the calm, but the bitter taste of suspicion lingered on my tongue. Nancy, my wife of 15 years, had been acting strange for weeks. It wasn't just her mood swings or the way she'd go off into a corner to take calls. No, it was something deeper. The way she looked at me, almost with a hint of pity. It gnawed at me like a splinter under the skin. And now, it seemed the answer to my growing unease was finally revealing itself. It started with a knock on the cabin door. I sat up, eyes narrowing. We were anchored miles away from the nearest port, and no one was supposed to visit us here. Nancy's voice drifted from the hallway, laced with the kind of forced cheeriness she only used when she was hiding something. "Come on in. We've been expecting you." I froze. Expecting who? Stepping out, I saw him, a young, chiseled man, maybe in his early 30s. His name was Brad, a name as obnoxiously youthful as he looked. A smirk played on his lips, and the way Nancy beamed at him sent a jolt of rage through my chest. What the hell was going on? "Roger, darling, this is Brad." Nancy introduced him with a casual wave of her hand, like she was bringing in a delivery guy with pizza. Her eyes flicked to me, daring me to question her, to show a reaction. "He's an old friend from my days in New York. I thought it would be nice to catch up." I swallowed, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. Friend? Right. I had never heard of this friend before, and Nancy was the type to flaunt her connections like a peacock. There was more to this, and I was damn sure I'd find out. Brad's hand extended toward me, and I found myself shaking it out of sheer reflex. His grip was firm, almost as if he was challenging me. I caught a whiff of expensive cologne, overly sweet and utterly out of place on my boat. Everything about him screamed privilege and arrogance. "Nice to meet you, sir," he said smoothly, his gaze slipping to Nancy, lingering a second too long. "Nancy's told me so much about you." "I bet she has," I thought bitterly. Something told me that if I didn't play this smart, I'd blow the lid off whatever charade Nancy was concocting here. So I forced a smile and nodded, my mind already racing. "Pleasure's mine," I replied coolly. "Any friend of Nancy's is a friend of mine." The corner of Brad's mouth twitched, almost in amusement, as if he knew I was lying through my teeth. And maybe he did, because I wasn't the only one hiding something on this yacht. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the yacht was bathed in hues of orange and pink. It would have been beautiful if not for the growing pit of dread in my stomach. I could hear Nancy's laughter echoing from the upper deck as she shared drinks with Brad. The sound was sharp, cutting through the air like glass, and I couldn't help but feel the sting of it. I poured myself another whiskey, letting the burn settle in my chest. Something was definitely off, and the more I thought about it, the clearer the picture became. It wasn't just some casual reunion with an old friend. Nancy hadn't even tried to involve me in their conversation. Instead, it was as if I had been dismissed, pushed to the background while they shared inside jokes, finishing each other's sentences with ease. I stood from my seat in the cabin, feeling the sway of the boat beneath my feet. I couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't paranoia. My gut screamed the truth I'd been avoiding. Nancy was having an affair, and this Brad was more than just some random guest on the yacht. I climbed the stairs to the upper deck, my heart pounding in my chest. Nancy and Brad were sitting close, too close. Her hand rested on his knee, and she leaned into him as she whispered something that made him laugh. It was intimate, far too intimate for my wife and a so-called friend. I stopped in my tracks, frozen in place as the weight of betrayal settled over me. "Roger, what are you doing down there?" Nancy's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. She looked at me, her eyes glittering with a challenge. Brad turned his head, his expression unreadable, but there was a smugness in his posture, like he knew he was winning. "I was just thinking I'd join you," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady, though inside, everything was crumbling. Nancy waved a hand dismissively, not bothering to hide her irritation. "Oh, don't be boring. We're just catching up. You wouldn't be interested in our little conversations." Brad chuckled, and my fists clenched. The audacity of her, the sheer, unapologetic boldness. It was like she didn't care anymore, like I was an inconvenience. That was the moment I realized just how deep her betrayal went. Nancy didn't just lie. She flaunted it, daring me to call her out. And that realization hit harder than anything else. I nodded, swallowing the anger that was bubbling up. I wasn't going to make a scene. Not yet, right? Well, I'll leave you to it then. The words tasted bitter, but I turned and walked away, feeling her eyes burning into my back. Back in the cabin, I sank into my chair, staring blankly out at the darkening sea. The noise from above continued, their voices mingling with the waves. I was angry, furious even, but more than that, I felt the weight of humiliation. Nancy was cheating on me, and she didn't even care enough to hide it anymore. This was only the beginning, and I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The next morning, I woke up with a headache that pulsed in time with the rocking of the boat. The night before had been hell, but today I was determined. I wasn't going to sit back and let Nancy make a fool out of me on my own yacht. If there was any proof of what I suspected, of what I knew, I was going to find it. The deck was empty when I stepped outside. No Nancy, no Brad. The sea was calm, the horizon stretching out endlessly, as if taunting me with its serenity. I moved silently, glancing around for any sign of where they might have gone. Then I heard it, the soft murmur of voices coming from the lower level. Careful not to make a sound, I crept down the stairs, following the sound to one of the private cabins. The door was slightly ajar, and I peered inside. There they were, sitting close together, their bodies angled toward each other as if sharing a secret. Nancy's hand rested on Brad's shoulder, her voice low and coaxing. "I can't keep doing this," she was saying, her tone tinged with mock concern. "Roger's starting to get suspicious." My pulse quickened. I leaned closer, every muscle tensed. Brad laughed softly. "What's he going to do? He's not the man he used to be, Nancy. You've got him wrapped around your finger." A surge of anger shot through me, but I forced myself to stay still. Wrapped around her finger? I wanted to burst in, to confront them right there, but I knew I needed more. More proof. More than just hushed words behind closed doors. "I know," Nancy sighed, and the sound of it twisted the knife deeper. "But I need him for now. He's got the money, the connections. If I leave too soon, I lose everything." Brad's hand slid to her knee, and I felt my teeth grind together. "It's all part of the plan, baby. We just have to wait a little longer. Once everything's set, you'll be free. We'll be free." Plan? What plan? My mind spun. I needed air. I turned on my heel and headed back up the stairs, my chest tightening with each step. This was more than just some tawdry affair. There was something else at play here, something I wasn't prepared for. I stumbled back to the main deck, gulping in the salty sea breeze. How long had this been going on? How long had I been blind to it? Anger and humiliation churned in my gut. They were using me, plotting against me right under my nose. I was nothing more than a pawn in whatever twisted game they were playing. It wasn't until I glanced over at the small office space near the helm that an idea hit me. Nancy wasn't stupid. She was careful, methodical. She'd be keeping track of everything. She'd have to if she was planning to pull something off. And where better to hide it all than in the most obvious place? Our shared office, where she knew I rarely ventured. I slipped inside, shutting the door quietly behind me. My fingers shook as I opened the drawers, rifling through papers and documents. At first, I found nothing out of the ordinary: receipts, bank statements, boring stuff. But then I noticed a small, nondescript notebook tucked at the back of one of the drawers. I pulled it out, my heart hammering. The first few pages seemed like normal notes, but as I flipped further, I found a list of names. Lawyers, private investigators, financial advisors. Beside each name were scribbled notes, meetings, payments, instructions. And then, a familiar name caught my eye: Brad Monroe. Next to it, in Nancy's neat handwriting, were the words, "Yacht Stage 2. My blood ran cold. Stage 2? What the hell was Stage 2? I flipped through frantically, but the rest of the pages were blank. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't fully outlined here. But it was enough. Enough to know that Nancy wasn't just cheating on me. She was setting me up, perhaps for something far worse. I shoved the notebook into my pocket, feeling a strange sense of clarity wash over me. The shock, the pain, it all hardened into something colder. Determination. If Nancy thought she could screw me over like this, she was in for a surprise. I was done playing the clueless husband. Done letting her walk all over me. It was time to turn the tables. I stood by the railing, staring out at the endless expanse of blue. The waves crashed softly against the hull, the sun already high in the sky, beating down with a merciless intensity. But I barely felt it. All I could focus on was the growing fury, the sense of betrayal that twisted through me like a knife. I had the proof now, that damned notebook burning a hole in my pocket. I heard them before I saw them. Their voices drifted down from the upper deck, laughter mixed with hushed conversation. The sound of it grated on me, each giggle and soft murmur like nails on a chalkboard. Steeling myself, I turned and headed up, taking the steps 2 at a time. I was done skulking around like some wounded animal. "Nancy!" I barked, my voice echoing sharply off the polished wood of the deck. They turned to me, both of them startled. Nancy's smile faltered, her eyes widening slightly. She was dressed in one of those skimpy bathing suits that left nothing to the imagination, lounging casually next to Brad as if she didn't have a care in the world, like she hadn't been caught red-handed. "Roger, what's with the yelling?" she asked, her tone clipped, a frown creasing her perfect brow. Brad leaned back, watching me with that same infuriating smirk, the kind of look a predator gives when it knows it's got the upper hand. My hands itched to wipe it off his face. "I think you know damn well what this is about," I growled, pulling the notebook out of my pocket and waving it in front of them. Nancy's gaze flicked to the notebook, then back to me. For the briefest second, something like panic flashed across her face, but it was gone just as quickly, replaced by cold, practiced indifference. She leaned back, crossing her arms over her chest, one brow arching as if I were nothing more than an annoyance. "Really, Roger?" she sighed, exasperation dripping from every word. "You're rifling through my things now? That's pretty low, even for you. Don't play games with me, Nancy." I snapped, the notebook trembling in my grip. "What is this? Stage 2? Lawyers? Private investigators? What the hell are you planning?" She rolled her eyes, her lips curling into a condescending smile. "Oh, come on. It's just business. You're overreacting as usual." Brad laughed softly beside her, and I felt my temper flare. I took a step forward, glaring at him. "And you?" I snarled. "What's your role in all this, huh? How long have you two been screwing around behind my back?" Brad raised his hands in mock surrender, his smile widening. "Whoa, calm down, old man. No need to get all worked up. We're just friends, right, Nancy?" He looked at her, and she gave a lazy nod, as if she couldn't be bothered to take this seriously. "Friends," I repeated, my voice rising. "Friends don't make plans to screw over someone's life. Nancy, I heard you two talking last night. I know this isn't just some fling." Nancy's gaze darkened, the smile slipping from her face. "And what are you going to do about it, Roger?" she spat, stepping closer, her eyes blazing with contempt. "Run crying to your lawyer? Beg me to stop? Don't you see? You don't have any power here. I'm in control now." The arrogance in her voice stunned me. This was a side of Nancy I hadn't seen before, a ruthless, cold-hearted side that I'd been too blind to notice. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I couldn't afford to lose it now. Not in front of them. "I'm not going to beg for anything, Nancy," I said slowly, my voice low and steady. "But you'd better believe I'm not going to just sit back and let you do whatever the hell you're planning. This yacht, the money, everything, we built it together, and I'm not letting you take it without a fight." Brad chuckled again, shaking his head. "You're out of your depth, Roger. Why don't you just—" "Shut up," I roared, cutting him off. The words came out louder than I intended, the force of it surprising even me. Brad stiffened, his smile fading. "You don't get to talk. Not to me." Not on my boat. There was a tense silence, the air crackling with barely restrained hostility. Nancy glanced between us, her expression unreadable. And then she did something that completely threw me off. She laughed. A cold, humorless laugh that sent shivers down my spine. "You still don't get it, do you?" she whispered, stepping even closer, her face inches from mine. "You're already losing, Roger. There's no fight left. You're just too stubborn to see it." With that, she turned on her heel, sauntering away without a backward glance. Brad gave me one last smirk before following her, leaving me standing there, the notebook clutched in my hand like a lifeline. My chest heaved, rage and confusion swirling inside me. What the hell had just happened? I'd confronted her, I'd shown her I knew, and yet, it felt like she'd won. Like I was the one left scrambling, while she calmly walked away. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. If she thought she could outmaneuver me, she was wrong. She was playing with fire, and it was only a matter of time before one of us got burned. And I was damn well going to make sure it wasn't me. For the next few days, the atmosphere on the yacht was unbearable. Nancy and Brad flaunted their newfound confidence, whispering to each other in hushed tones, laughing behind my back like I was a doddering fool. I could hardly look at either of them without wanting to throw something overboard. But I kept my composure, acting like I'd back down, letting them think they'd gotten to me. The more brazen they became, the more I knew I was onto something bigger. I needed a way to turn the tables, to expose them for who they really were. So I started gathering my own kind of evidence. If they thought I was too old and clueless to figure out what was going on, they were dead wrong. I knew there had to be more than just a notebook full of names. I needed to figure out what this so-called stage 2 was. There had to be some digital trail, emails, messages, something that would tell me exactly what Nancy and Brad were scheming. So I decided to set a trap of my own. It was early morning when I snuck into the cabin while they were still asleep. I made my way to Nancy's personal desk, the place she usually guarded like a hawk. I knew she kept her laptop there, password protected, of course, but there were always ways around these things. I'd hired enough tech guys in my business years to know a few tricks myself. I plugged in a small flash drive, a keylogger I'd bought years ago for a completely different purpose. It was old, but it would do the job. Once installed, it would record every single keystroke on her laptop. Passwords, emails, messages, everything. All I needed was for her to access it without knowing I'd been here. I stood up, satisfied, and took one last look around. Nancy's things were scattered everywhere. Expensive jewelry, designer bags, all bought with my money. It made my blood boil just looking at it. But what really caught my eye was a small, crumpled piece of paper shoved carelessly under her laptop. I reached for it, unfolding it carefully. It was a receipt for a hotel booking. And not just any hotel, the St. Regis, one of the most luxurious places in Monaco. Dated 2 weeks ago. The room booked under Brad's name. I stared at it, feeling the bile rise in my throat. So, it had been going on for at least that long. They'd probably laughed about it, sipping champagne in some posh suite while I was back on this damn boat. None the wiser. My hand shook as I folded the receipt and stuffed it into my pocket. I couldn't confront them now. Not without more evidence. But when I did, I was going to destroy every little illusion they'd built around themselves. Later that afternoon, I pretended to take a nap while Nancy and Brad lounged on the deck. I made sure to place my phone on the table, facing them, its camera rolling quietly. Let them think I was oblivious. I wanted every bit of their smug expressions on tape when the time came. "Why do you keep him around?" Brad asked, his voice drifting down to where I lay. I kept my breathing slow, steady, though my heart pounded furiously. Nancy's laugh was low, dismissive. "I told you he's useful. He's got the connections, the respectability. When the time's right, he'll sign over the assets and we'll be rid of him." "What if he doesn't?" Brad's tone held a hint of doubt. "Oh, he will," Nancy purred, her voice dripping with confidence. "Trust me, he's too proud to let everything crumble. Once he thinks he's cornered, he'll agree to anything to save face." I clenched my teeth, forcing myself to remain still. They were planning to corner me, to humiliate me into giving up everything I'd worked for. But they'd underestimated me, underestimated what I'd do when pushed to the edge. As the sun set and shadows lengthened across the deck, I reviewed the recording, watching their expressions, their body language. They were getting bolder, thinking I was defeated, and that was exactly what I wanted. That evening, I made a show of being distant and aloof. I poured myself a whiskey and sat alone on the upper deck, staring out at the darkening sea. Nancy approached me cautiously, as if sensing the shift in my demeanor. "Roger, you've been awfully quiet lately," she murmured, sliding up beside me. Her fingers trailed along my arm, but I shook her off, unable to stomach her touch. "Just thinking, Nancy," I said flatly, "thinking about how much things have changed." Her smile faltered, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Good. Let her wonder. Let her doubt. Change is a good thing," she said lightly, trying to regain her composure. "You can't hold onto the past forever." I turned to look at her, my gaze hard and unyielding. "No, I suppose you can't. But some things, Nancy, some things are worth fighting for." She looked at me, confusion and something else. Fear, maybe, flashing across her face. I smiled, a cold, mirthless smile that made her take a step back. "Enjoy the sunset," I murmured, turning away from her. I'd let them think they were winning for now. But once I had everything I needed, I'd pull the rug out from under both of them. And when I did, they wouldn't know what hit them. The following evening, I received the notification I'd been waiting for. The keystroke data from Nancy's laptop. I sat alone in the dark cabin, the only light coming from the laptop screen in front of me. As I scrolled through the information, the pieces of their plan started to fall into place. Emails between Nancy and Brad were full of details. They had it all figured out. How they would manipulate me into signing over control of the business, the assets, everything. They'd even discussed how to use a fake financial crisis to push me into a corner, making me think I had no choice but to hand everything over. But what really caught my attention was the mention of something called Project Marlin. Coded language for the final step of their betrayal. If they could pull it off, I'd be left penniless and stripped of everything I'd ever built. I stared at the screen, a cold smile forming. They'd been so careful, so meticulous, but they hadn't expected me to fight back. They thought I was just a decrepit old man who couldn't keep up with their schemes. But if there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that you never, ever underestimate a desperate man. With the information I had now, I could expose them for the liars and thieves they were. But I needed to go a step further. I needed to lure them into thinking they'd succeeded, let them feel that sweet taste of victory. Right before I yanked it away and left them choking on their own arrogance. The opportunity presented itself the next morning. I found Nancy alone in the galley, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I entered, her expression guarded. "Morning, darling," she greeted, her voice carefully neutral. "Morning," I replied gruffly, grabbing a cup of coffee and sitting across from her. I let the silence stretch between us, watching as she shifted uncomfortably. "Good. Let her sweat." "I've been thinking," I started, keeping my tone measured, "about everything." She blinked, lowering her phone. "Oh, yeah," I continued, staring into my coffee as if gathering my thoughts. "About us. The business. Maybe you're right, Nancy. Maybe it's time I stepped back, handed over the reins." Her eyes widened slightly, surprise and suspicion mingling in her gaze. "You're serious?" "Yeah," I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "I'm tired, and I think I've been holding you back. You and your friend Brad." The words tasted bitter, but I kept my expression neutral. Nancy hesitated, studying me as if trying to read between the lines. But then, slowly, her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I think that's a wise decision, Roger. It's time for a new chapter. Don't you think?" I nodded, my hands tightening around the coffee cup. "I'll make the arrangements when we get back to shore. We can start discussing the transfer of assets, but I'd like Brad to be involved, too, if he's going to be helping you manage things." Nancy's smile widened, and I could see the excitement barely contained in her eyes. Of course, I think that's a wonderful idea. I pushed back from the table, giving her a tight smile. I'm going to get some air. We can talk more later. She nodded, still watching me with that calculating gaze. I left the galley, making my way to the upper deck where Brad lounged casually, sipping a drink and pretending to admire the view. He glanced over as I approached, his smile smug and self-satisfied. "Nancy tells me you've had a change of heart," he said smoothly, raising his glass in mock toast. "Yeah, something like that," I muttered, leaning against the railing. "Look, I get it. I'm not a young man anymore. Maybe it's time to pass the torch. Let you two take things to the next level." Brad's eyes gleamed with triumph. "I knew you'd come around, Roger. It's what's best for everyone." "Sure," I agreed, forcing a smile. "But I want to do it right. Make it official. I've got some papers I want you both to look at. Just a formality, really." He grinned, his arrogance shining through. "We'd be happy to." "Great," I replied, clapping him on the shoulder. "Let's do it tonight. Dinner on the deck. Just the three of us. To celebrate the future." Brad nodded, raising his glass again. "Looking forward to it." As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. I was setting the stage, putting the pieces in place. Tonight it would all come to a head. I'd let them think they were winning, let them believe they were about to seal the deal. But they had no idea what was coming. I contacted my own people, lawyers, financial experts, and had a new set of documents drawn up. If Nancy and Brad thought they could con me into handing over everything, they were in for a rude awakening. By the time this night was over, their entire scheme would be exposed. And the sweet satisfaction of seeing their faces when they realized everything had been flipped upside down, that would be worth every minute of this torment. I was going to take back what was mine, and leave them with nothing but shattered dreams and empty hands. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait. The sun dipped low, casting a fiery glow across the sea, as if nature itself sensed the storm brewing on this yacht. I stood on the deck, waiting for Nancy and Brad to join me. The table was set. Candles flickered in the evening breeze. Wine glasses sparkled under the soft light. Everything looked perfect, like a scene from a romantic evening. But this was no ordinary dinner. It was the final act of our sordid little play. I adjusted my tie, keeping my face carefully composed. Inside, I was a coiled spring, every muscle taut with anticipation. Tonight, everything would unravel. Nancy was the first to arrive, gliding onto the deck in a flowing red dress that clung to her curves. She was radiant, poised, completely unaware that she was walking into a trap. Her eyes met mine, and she smiled, a smile that had once melted my heart, but now only stirred cold disdain. "Roger, you look handsome," she purred, running a hand down my arm as she leaned in for a kiss on the cheek. I let her, feeling the bitterness rise in my throat. It was amazing how easily she could switch from predator to doting wife. "You're stunning as always, Nancy," I replied smoothly, my tone betraying nothing. Before she could respond, Brad sauntered in, dressed casually in an open-collared shirt and slacks. He shot me a grin that made my blood boil. "Evening, Roger. Nancy tells me you've got some exciting news for us." "Indeed, Brad." I gestured to the table, motioning for them to sit. "I've got a few things I'd like to go over. Business, future plans. Tying up loose ends." They exchanged a quick glance, and I could almost see the wheels turning in their heads. To them, this was the moment they'd been waiting for. They thought they were about to walk away with everything. We sat down, and I poured the wine, letting the silence stretch as I savored the tension in the air. Nancy and Brad were practically buzzing with anticipation. I took my time, sipping my wine slowly before finally setting my glass down and pulling out a folder from my briefcase. "I had some new documents drawn up," I began, placing the folder on the table. "Everything you asked for, Nancy. But I want to make sure we're all on the same page before I sign anything over." Nancy's eyes lit up as she reached for the folder. "Of course, darling. We just want what's best for you." I bit back a bitter laugh. Best for me? Right. Brad leaned forward, his eyes scanning the first few pages. Looks like everything's in order, he murmured, nodding to Nancy. Not so fast, I interrupted, my voice cutting through the night air like a blade. There are a few adjustments I made. Just to protect myself, you understand. They froze, their smiles faltering. What adjustments? Nancy asked, her voice tight. I leaned back, enjoying their discomfort. I added a clause. One that ensures if I step down, the assets remain in the family's control. Meaning that the power of attorney will revert to our children. I paused, watching their expressions shift from confusion to realization. And since we don't have any children, Nancy, it means the assets won't transfer to you, but will instead go to my charitable trust. Nancy's face paled, her grip on the folder tightening. You can't do that, Roger. We agreed. We agreed on nothing. I cut her off, my voice rising. You thought you could play me, manipulate me into giving you everything. But I'm not the fool you think I am. Brad cleared his throat, his face flushing with anger. You bastard. Sit down, Brad. I snapped, my gaze locking onto his. You don't get to speak here. He looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my eyes must have warned him off. He sank back into his chair, jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists on the table. I turned back to Nancy, my voice low, filled with the fury I'd kept bottled up for weeks. I know everything, Nancy. The hotel receipts, the emails, your plan to have me sign over the business. Stage 2, right? You two really thought you could outsmart me? Nancy's mouth opened, but no words came out. The look of utter shock and disbelief on her face was almost satisfying. I trusted you, I whispered harshly, leaning forward. And you turned me into a joke. But the joke's on you now, sweetheart. Every document you're holding right now is useless. You don't get a dime. And as of tomorrow, I'm moving forward with divorce proceedings. Her eyes widened. You wouldn't. Oh, I would. I hissed. And when we're done, you'll walk away with nothing. You want to play games? Fine. But you should have known better than to go up against me. Brad shifted uncomfortably, but I wasn't done. Which brings us to you, Brad, I said, turning my gaze on him. You thought you could just waltz into my life, play the role of Nancy's little sidekick, and leave unscathed? Brad opened his mouth, but I didn't give him a chance to speak. Do you know who my lawyers are? I asked softly. The same ones who've buried countless men like you. They've already started on your background, your debts, your affairs, everything. And they're very thorough. By the time they're done, you'll be lucky if you have enough to buy yourself a bus ticket out of here. Brad's face turned crimson, but he kept his mouth shut, his eyes darting nervously between Nancy and me. I stood up, smoothing my jacket, and looked down at both of them. Enjoy the rest of your evening, I said coldly. I'll be disembarking at the next port. By the time you get back to shore, Nancy, your accounts will be frozen. Everything will be gone. Nancy's expression morphed from shock to fury. You can't do this, Roger, she spat, her voice shrill with desperation. I smiled, a cruel, satisfied smile that showed every ounce of the pain and rage she'd put me through. Watch me. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving them sitting there, stunned and defeated. The satisfaction I felt was like a balm to the wounds they'd inflicted. I had finally taken control, ripped the power back from their grasping hands. And as I descended the stairs, I knew one thing for certain. This war wasn't over yet, but they'd just lost the first battle. And I wasn't done with them, not by a long shot. The gentle hum of the yacht's engines reverberated through the night air as I disembarked at a quiet, secluded port along the French Riviera. The lights of the marina glittered softly on the water, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the chaos I'd left behind. I took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp sea breeze and savoring the sweet, heady taste of victory. Behind me, Nancy and Brad were still on the deck, their voices raised in a frantic argument. They were scrambling now, trying to salvage whatever was left of their plans. But it was too late. They were trapped, tangled in the very web they'd tried to weave around me. I stepped onto the dock, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. It was done. I'd won. But as I walked away from the yacht, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down at the screen, my brow furrowing as an unknown number flashed across it. With a sigh, I answered, half expecting one of my lawyers or advisors to be calling with some last-minute update. "Roger speaking," I said briskly, already looking ahead, planning my next move. "Roger?" A familiar voice rasped through the line, and I stopped dead in my tracks. "It's been a long time, hasn't it?" My breath caught in my throat. No, it couldn't be. I'd recognized that voice anywhere, even if I hadn't heard it in years. Frank, my ex-business partner. The man I'd thought was out of the picture for good. The man Nancy had insisted on cutting ties with after a nasty fallout years ago. "What the hell are you doing calling me, Frank?" I demanded, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Just thought I'd check in," he drawled, the faint sound of laughter in his voice. "See how you're holding up with everything that's been going on. I heard about your little dilemma with your wife." My grip tightened around the phone. "What do you know about it?" Frank's chuckle was low and dangerous. "More than you think. You see, Roger, I was never really out of the picture. Not completely. And neither was Nancy. She came to me after our falling out, you know. She was the one who approached me with that deal. Said she needed a partner who could really take you down." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about?" "Brad," Frank continued, ignoring my question. "Yeah, he was never the brains behind this whole operation. Just a pretty face, a distraction. Nancy knew you'd underestimate him. But it was me, Roger. I'm the one she's been working with from the start." My mind reeled as his words sank in. Nancy and Frank. Working together? All this time? But it didn't make sense. I'd been careful. I'd seen the desperation in Nancy's eyes tonight. She was on the edge of losing everything, unless she'd planned it that way. "She fed you just enough information, didn't she?" Frank continued, his tone mocking. "Let you find that notebook, let you think you were outsmarting her. All to get you to show your hand, to bring the lawyers and financial guys into the game. She needed you to make those moves, to create the very scenario that's about to ruin you." I swallowed, my throat dry. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, you poor bastard, that Nancy already knew you'd be doing this. She wanted you to push her to get her accounts frozen. Because while you've been busy burning everything down, she's been transferring assets you don't even know about to a different trust. One I helped her set up years ago. It's untouchable." My heart sank. "No, you're lying. Check your bank account," he sneered. "See if there's anything left." With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone, logging into my account. My blood ran cold as the page loaded, and I saw it. Empty. Everything. My investments, my savings, all gone. A few figures left behind, a fraction of what there should have been. "Impossible," I whispered. "I had them under surveillance. They couldn't." "She's smarter than you think, Roger," Frank interrupted. "She played you from day one. And now, while you're licking your wounds, she's sitting on a yacht much nicer than yours, sipping champagne with Brad, and making plans to leave this place for good. She's got everything she needs to disappear, and you've got nothing." My vision blurred with rage, the world narrowing to a pinpoint. I'd been so focused on trapping her, on winning, that I'd let myself get blindsided. I hadn't just lost the battle. I'd lost everything. "Why?" I croaked. "Why are you doing this?" "Because, Roger, you took everything from me when you pushed me out of the company. Did you really think I'd let that slide? I've been waiting for years for my chance to get even. And Nancy, well, let's just say she was the perfect ally. You never saw it coming." The line went dead, and I stood there, staring at the phone in my hand as if it might explode. My head spun. Everything was gone. My money, my reputation, and Nancy. She'd been playing me all along, even through my so-called victory. I glanced back at the yacht, the memories of our life together flashing through my mind like a cruel joke. Every smile, every touch, it had all been a lie. And now she'd won. Not just the assets or the money, but my pride, my dignity. She'd ripped it all away in one masterful stroke. And yet, as I stood there on that darkened dock, a strange calm settled over me. I knew what I had to do. With a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders, walking back to the yacht for one final confrontation. This wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't about winning or losing. This was personal. And if Nancy thought she could just waltz off into the sunset, she was sorely mistaken. I'd built myself from nothing once before. I'd lost it all and climbed back up. But this time I wasn't just going to rebuild. This time I was going to destroy them both. Because if there's one thing Nancy had forgotten, it's that I wasn't the man to cross lightly, and I had nothing left to lose. With a renewed sense of purpose, I walked back up the gangplank, the dark waters whispering secrets of revenge beneath me. The game wasn't over. It had just begun.